Today on Inside the Professor's Study, my guest is Dr. Larry Dooley, Chair of the Department of Theater. Dr. Dooley earned a BA at Newberry College in Religion and Philosophy, and a Master's of Divinity from Lutheran Seminary in Columbia, South Carolina, a Master's in Theater History from the University of South Carolina, and a PhD in Theater History from Indiana University. After teaching at Weber State University in Utah and Northwestern University, he arrived at CSU in 2010. We begin our conversation today by talking about the very strong and newly reaccredited theater program at CSU. I'm here today with Dr. Larry Dooley, Chair of the Department of Theater. Thank you for coming and making the time.
Well, thank you for having me.
So first of all, wanted to offer huge congratulations because you have big news. The program is newly accredited.
Right. Actually, we've been renewed for accreditation. That got a little jumbled in the news story.
See.
So we've been on a 5-year cycle with National Associations of Schools of Theater, and we were accredited. But we've reached the point now where we're up for our 10-year review. So we passed this one, and that means we can go 10 years without it again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, from everything I understand about going through an accreditation process, it's grueling.
It really is. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what you've had to do to prepare for this.
Well, and luckily we had done it before, so some of that was in place. You know, the first time you go through one is incredibly grueling because you have to get all the stats, everything from the size of rooms that you teach in to the facilities that are available, the equipment that's available to students, number, quantity, every piece of information that I would not have thought of, and then they even look at the university and they want to know about library holdings, access to things, and so they do all that, and then of course faculty accomplishments, student accomplishments, everything about the production program, everything about the academic program, and so it ends up being a binder that's probably about that thick, and like I said, some of the things didn't have to be reinvented, which was nice, but a lot of the stats have changed. So then they bring in a visitation team, and they come in and they have your book and they look at it, your self-study. They look at it, they ask questions, they meet with administrators, meet with students, meet with faculty, staff, go all through the process, and then they write a recommendation, and then there's a national conference at which time the evaluators go through it and make their recommendations.
Well, congratulations for getting through
It's nice to have it behind us.
No doubt, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, the program is one of our strongest, kind of a gem in the university's crown.
Well, thank you.
And a lot of what you do, and I don't know if this is part of what the accreditors are interested in, has to do with interactions with the community and the public and making a real contribution to the cultural scene.
Yeah.
And in particular, I would imagine one of the strengths that our department has really been able to showcase is the work you do with the high school theater organizations around the state.
Right, and we're incredibly fortunate to be a part of that. There's really 2 organizations in Georgia that are the largest of those groups. The one is actually for high school students and others, so it may include some college students, and it's called the Georgia Theater Conference. And they both look alike. If you see them written down, they're not very far off from each other, GTC and GTC. But the Georgia Theater Conference is going to have they move around, and they're going to have their convention with us next year, which it's been a while since we've hosted that. But that'll probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,200 students that'll come to campus, and And they really enjoy coming to the River Park area. There's enough performance venues, classroom space. It's pretty contained, that there's a pretty safe feel to it. But one of the reasons that we're doing that is because we've gotten a lot of experience hosting the Georgia Thespians Conference, which is high school. And it's every high school that has a troupe. So it's not every high school, but every high school that has a troupe, Thespians Conference. And they send their students to this, and it's now at about 4,000 students who come in February. They're here for 3 or 4 days. We just think it's wonderful for us. It's almost overwhelming, but it's wonderfully overwhelming. It's a great chance for us to showcase our facilities, for people to see the downtown campus and more, but primarily they're located down there. And it's a great chance for us to talk about our program, but it's also just a great chance for students to come together. And when you're in a theater program in high school, you probably start to think there's probably no one else like me. And so when you get to do something like this, you suddenly realize it's a lot bigger than you think it is.
Yeah. Well, it's really exciting that weekend when all of the kids are here, and you can feel downtown swell a little bit.
Absolutely. Don't go to the coffee shop.
That's right. That's right. Well, from the perspective of your faculty and you, I mean, in one respect, it's like hosting a giant, out of town. You're hosting guests from out of town. But are you also involved in delivering any kind of like workshops or content, or?
Individually, our faculty are really, in many ways, although we're hosting, the conference has its own infrastructure.
Okay.
So they bring in outside displays, outside recruiters. That's part of the deal. We're obviously recruiting for our program, but other people are recruiting as well. So they come from many states across the country, recruiting for that. We use the Trade Center as the main place, which is right next to our downtown campus, our theater area. So they use that. They use that for all the displays and many workshops, many demonstrations. I remember, I think it was not this year, but last year I went, and they had people that fly people, like for Peter Pan productions and things. So they had people that all the students that wanted to got to get hooked up and fly across the room, and there's a real skill to it.
That's cool.
Yeah. So then on our side, we're really. I'm going to say two different things. One is the one reason they do like to come is we have about 160 theater majors, and it's part of their service to the department. It's really a requirement. We like to say a wonderful opportunity, but it's part of the requirements that they help with the festival. So there's 160 volunteers that are helping make this happen, which is one reason they like coming, and understandably. So we're involved beyond the usual participation, but our faculty are just like other faculty. They can volunteer to teach workshops, and many of them do. We have makeup workshops, dance workshops, even playwriting and critiquing workshops, that sort of thing.
Right. Well, what an awesome recruiting tool.
Oh, it's great.
I mean, I would imagine that in the years before you started hosting the conference, and since then, you've seen a real reward.
Well, that conference used to move around the state, and probably about 5 years ago now, they came here, and the River Park campus was pretty brand new. And they came and they wanted to stay because it really worked for them. We love having them. It's a great economic boom to the downtown. The Visitor and Convention Center Bureau estimates that it brings in close to $750,000, like about $800,000.
Yeah.
So it's really a boom for hotels and tourism. So that's the wonderful part about it. In the days before that, there were a lot more visits to high schools that were taking place, and the problem with that is if somebody's not familiar with Columbus State, you can tell them how wonderful things are and how beautiful they look, and they just don't get it.
Yeah, I agree. And from what I've seen of other campuses in the USG system, we have an amazing, amazingly beautiful place to offer.
And state-of-the-art performance facilities. And that makes a difference. I mean, you can, I'm not going to say that's all there is to theater. I mean, there's a lot of performances that can take place in other venues. But we do a lot today with technology. Our design students expect to use state-of-the-art lighting, set building techniques and things. So to be able to offer that is important.
Yeah, yeah.
You're competing with people who want to and some who do.
Right, right. Well, let me ask you a little bit about the production side of, the season and, how hard you have to work to sort of cultivate a community audience. What have you seen change over the years in terms of the theater department's community face, I guess?
Yeah, we occupy sort of an odd and interesting niche. We're not necessarily a commercial theater. We have an academic mission, and we really feel that this is a chance for students to experiment, to be introduced to new works, to do things that one wouldn't immediately say, well, this will be a big seller or anything like that.
Yeah.
So we do have that niche, and we have studio shows primarily where we'll do things that most of us have not heard of before we started investigating it, and let alone folks in the public, and they're going to say, well, what is that show? So part of our goal is to build a familiarity, and I would even say a loyalty, that if you'll trust us with these, not every time, sometimes you're going to leave and say, well, that was just a little odd.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're going to leave and say, well, that was a
odd
little...
is not
well, I was
terrible.
going to say, sometimes you're going to leave and say, that was odd and I really liked it.
Yeah.
It was something really different than what I'm used to.
Yeah.
So we have to build that audience continually. And we have to be willing to know that sometimes they won't like everything we do, and sometimes they... I hope they're going to say it's always well done. So we do try to build audience by being as commercial as we can with some shows. We'll pick things that we think are going to be really interesting to the public. We'll do a large musical. We like to bring people in. Obviously, it's the nice part about being a state institution is that we do receive funding, so we're not always bottom line driven, although it's more so than it used to be. But we have to have that flexibility.
Yeah, yeah. That is really interesting. I appreciate the risks that you're able to take because you don't necessarily have to turn a profit on with, every show.
Right.
Well, how does that play out in terms of training all of these students, right? I mean, there must be also occasions in which you really need to offer them practice with the risk that it might not go so well.
And our production program, interestingly, because that's the most prominent part of of what we do. I mean, if people think of a theater program, they think of performances, and they should, of course. But it's really the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more going on than we do in terms of public presentations. So, we have large-scale musicals, we have large stage plays, we have small studio productions, but even that's only scratching the surface. Am I mixing my analogies? Iceberg, surface? I don't know.
No.
But the things that take place beyond that are pretty impressive. We have directing classes, acting classes, and then all those, and we have student-driven lab series, free stages. There's all sorts of performances that are taking place that we don't advertise to the public because we really see them as classroom exercises. But some of those are really stretching the boundaries, introducing students that maybe haven't been cast yet as they're making their way through.
Right.
So there's a lot of things like that taking place that involve the students and give them a taste of what to do.
Yeah, that makes good sense.
Yeah.
Gives everybody a lot more opportunities to practice and to take all those chances. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they're fun to see. I mean, that's sort of a treat for being a theater professor, and I think being around, because like I said, we don't sell tickets. It's generally not a public, they'll bring their parents and things, but it's generally not a public performance. But they'll have 160 theater majors there supporting them, and so it's a big performance for them.
Well, I know I came to see a lab performance that was of scenes from The Tempest.
Yeah.
A year ago or so.
Right. I remember
it was terrific.
Yeah, it's great
really
fun,
great.
and they really do have the opportunity to fail. I mean, it's okay to do that. It's all right to try something and say, well, it sounded a lot better than it turned out, and we try to be more selective with our big public performances, but they have to be able to do that and say, well, next time, strike that.
Yeah. One of the things that I have observed about student, I don't know, products of student learning in the arts that I think is particularly cool for the students is that we're always talking about real world applications, right? Well, I mean, how much more real world can you get than this thing is going to have to be performed?
Absolutely.
In front of live people, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, see what the response is. And that's true for the designers, the technicians as well. I mean, they're scrambling to make something effective, often on a limited budget.
Yeah.
So it's good for them too.
Yeah, I just really appreciate, I guess, the way that engagement is so intense.
Yeah,
I
agree.
Because of that moment where this is not just you and an exam that will fail or pass in the privacy of your own.
Absolutely, no one will know. You and the professor.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about how you got interested in theater as a student yourself. Were you involved from young age?
Well, yes and no. When I was, this was not a career choice for me early on. I came back into this because of some seeds that were planted early on, I think. But for me, it was community theater. We had moved from New York to Florida when I was in junior high, and I got involved in a community theater, ran the lights. It was real hands-on type. Now we press a button on the light board. Back then you had big dials and things that you had to turn, so it was a lot of fun. Felt like you had all the power.
Right.
But I got involved in that, a little bit of acting with that. Ended up getting involved in some plays at school, and so I always had an interest in it. And then when I went up to college, I actually applied for a campus job and started building sets as part of my campus job. So I'd be there in the afternoon, and it's a very small school up in South Carolina.
Yeah.
And as I like to tell people, then I started getting cast in a lot of things because I was a living, breathing male who wanted to be. There wasn't a lot of selectivity. It was pretty small pickings, slim pickings. So they would use me in a lot of things, and I had a great time, got a lot of great experience. But it wasn't what I was studying. I was taking a lot of theater classes, but it wasn't what I was studying. I was actually doing religion and philosophy at that time, and ended up doing graduate work and working in that area.
Yeah.
So.
In the next part of our conversation, Larry and I talk about theater history and perceptions of theater as an immoral activity. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and your area of scholarly expertise, though, is history and criticism.
Has
right?
been, yeah.
Has been.
Yeah, it is, but not as much as it used to be.
Yeah. And you did some work in Restoration Theater? Or early 18th century?
Early 18th century. That was, I had an interest from, I had done a Master of Divinity degree, and I had studied some things about Salzburg Lutherans coming over to this country, and they came over in the very early 1700s and came through Britain. They were expelled from Germany. The British sent them over here. They were sort of a buffer for Oglethorpe and the settlement of Georgia. And the whole reason I got involved in that is my wife is descended from those folks. So I was very curious about it. She was curious about it, so I kept pursuing it. And, sort of cut to the chase, when I went back into theater, I said, well, I'm kind of familiar with that period. I like the early 18th century. I had been reading some novels that come a little later, I guess, but Defoe and Fielding really interested me at that time. And turned out, I discovered in a theater history book that Henry Fielding, the author of Tom Jones and things, was one of the most successful theater producers of the day. And he's hardly ever even mentioned in the same breath with theater anymore.
No, you're right. Yeah.
And absolutely one of the entrepreneurs, and wrote quite a few plays. And so I got fascinated with that, and then I combined that with my interest in history, depictions of religious diversity, the people who were not attending the theater, the more pietistic types.
Yeah, I was going to say this, the religious strand and the theater strand seem like they're about to collide here, but...
So thank goodness I had a dissertation director that thought that this would be worthwhile pursuing, and ended up, spending a lot of time reading those plays, ended up focusing on the comedies, because there were so many plays from that period, you really almost have to narrow it. So I focused down on the comedies and started looking for the ways in which they were depicting religious characters.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great fun.
That is neat. Well, and
I actually enjoyed my dissertation. Not everybody says that.
Well, and did you focus mainly on British plays?
It was.
Or did you do any French ones?
No, not at that time. Although my dissertation director's field of expertise was Moliere. So, he would have liked that, but I ended up having to push it towards the British because there was so much there for what I was doing. That was plenty.
Well, so my period sort of, the horizon for me is Restoration. So I think of, late 17th century as being pretty randy plays.
Absolutely.
And, so how does it change at the turn of the century? Does it become any more...
That's the question I love, because that's it's funny to watch the trends. It's almost as if, that 1660 to 1700 period or so was really exactly what you're talking about, pretty bawdy stuff, almost in the face of the Puritans, who were back. The king had been expelled. The people with him had been watching French plays. They knew French theater. They knew some of the, so when they came back in, those plays really were for mainly the aristocrats, As you move into early 1700, you begin to see the rise of the middle class. The sensibilities become a little bit more pietistic, but not right away. Some of the plays try to be Restoration funny, but sort of a little bit watered down, where things actually took place in the Restoration stage. They're only hinted at in the early 18th century. And then you really, by the time really where I stopped my research, officially or whatever, but by the time you move into the mid-1700s, rise of Methodism and these types of things, you really begin to see admirable characters being put on the stage much more.
Yeah. Well, and that's so interesting because it loops back, I think, to late 16th century when the business of theater was growing and its morality was really in question.
Yes,
always. Work that I did in graduate school was about the way that characters referred to their ability to dissimulate or to be something that they weren't.
Absolutely.
And it was even within a short decade or so, I thought changing so that acting as a resource of, a human kind of skill then became seen as more of a, neutral force that you may or may not deploy in your interactions with other people. Whereas, before, say, Marlowe and Shakespeare, people who pretended to be something that they weren't were the bad characters.
Especially if they got paid for it.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, you really do have those early, school plays and things that reached quite a level. I mean, they were, pretty strong theater, but they were volunteers, so the morally suspect nature of it was not quite as pronounced as when people started making money at it. And of course, after the Restoration, when you have women on the stage in British theater, then it's one thing for a man to pretend to be something he is, and another thing in that context for a woman to dissimulate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's great stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
So that I had a great time looking at, the people that were coming into England at that time, the people that would be outsiders, everything from the Jewish population to the rising Quakers and Presbyterians, the Puritans, and others that were, really not attending the theater because they had all those suspicions about its morality, and in most cases they were probably right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, so here's a really nerdy technical question for you. How often is thou used as a second person after 1700?
Oh, good Lord.
Does it go away? I mean, is it used much in the, it would sound antiquated,
I don't think so.
wouldn't you think?
I don't think so. I'm trying to, dig back into the memory bank here on some of the plays.
Yeah. Just because I always have to explain when I'm dealing with older lit, when somebody is using that and it's already old-fashioned sounding, right?
So the Quaker characters
when did it
are
go away,
of.
right? And so even when I was teaching history of the English language, I wasn't really able to find a clear answer for when thou drops out of English practice and why. And so I have this little theory that because it was so closely associated with Puritans, that when they fell out of favor, it was as if the whole culture said, we're distancing ourselves from these thou sayers because they're uncool now. What do you think?
Oh, you've got the wheels turning now, because I'm thinking that, part of the ridiculing that the Quakers take in the theater, because again, they're not there, they're not paying, don't ridicule your audience. The other, part of that is that they do speak in that antiquated way. So already by early 1700s, they sound old-fashioned, and of course then they go on to say that they're one thing in public and another in private.
Oh yes. Yeah. I've come across references to that too.
Yeah.
Well, and of course the difficult thing for us as modern audience members or readers is that because it's old, we tend to think of it as being the more formal usage, whereas it was the more intimate, it was the informal you know.
Interesting.
And so I'm always having to remind students and help them absorb the fact that thou was the close.
That's
you.
great. I like seeing that
we have
trace.
A personal relationship with God, and so it's and with each other we're peers. There's not this sense of hierarchy with yous and thous.
Terrific. Yeah. Another thing that kind of goes along with that, you got me thinking about it, is that most historians go back and say that in the 1700s, I'm not sure when the evidence is that a Shakespeare play is produced as written. That most of the Shakespeare, especially in the early part of the century, there were people like Nahum Tate who made a living out of producing Shakespeare with alternative endings.
Oh yeah.
Because he just found that the morality of all these people dying and good, just people dying, spoke against God's will, and so the audience didn't want those endings. They wanted Lear to live.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, they just thought that was sort of a a failing that Shakespeare had.
Yeah.
Of course, now we have people that would just go crazy.
Right. Yeah. The bardolater
That's
would
right.
not be happy.
That's right.
Huh. In the last part of our conversation, Larry and I talk about helping students to absorb criticism as a life skill and about the upcoming theater season at CSU. Well, so that actually reminds me of an interesting talk I heard last week that Natalia Temesgen gave as part of our faculty forum series in English about revision in play development.
Okay.
And I know that you worked together with her script writing class and your students.
We did.
And I wanted to hear more about how you think the students, were able to work together and what kind of process that involved for you, to work with another faculty member.
Oh, well, I had a great time with Natalia, and she's really good, and she was very nurturing to the students, and yet, had appropriate challenges to what they were doing. So, I learned a lot from being around her and working with her, and I had a great time throwing my 2 cents in. I would say that for most beginning playwrights, there's quite a mixture of responses. It's often like beginning actors, that some people at that point really take some of the challenges a little too personally. I tell them the story that when I was in graduate school, one of my best friends was an MFA playwriting student, and he invited me, and I'd never been to one, a first reading of a play, and I remember sitting there and really enjoying it, and then they opened up the floor, and I just thought they went at him, without mercy. I just thought it was horrible, and I kind of went up to offer consolation. He goes, "Oh no, that was great. That's what I needed." He said, "I was worried about some of these things, so now I think I have direction." And it takes a while for a student to get there. The first time, we often say, you're killing their baby. That's terrible. But they've written this play, and you put it, you come in, you say, that character really has no function. I think they can go away. Yeah. That's sorry, I'm hitting the mic maybe. Yeah. But they're saying that they just can't imagine that. And then you have other students that have kind of progressed to that point where they take it as helpful criticism and a way to make it better, and they're everything you want them to do with it. Doesn't mean they have to do what you tell them. Yeah. But they really have to take into account that a relatively educated audience of their peers who are familiar with theater don't find this particular aspect of your play effective. What are you going to do about it?
So do you think the students in your classes developed better ability to take criticism?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just watching other people take criticism and other people coming back with the revision, that sometimes that one reason I love playwriting classes is I'm just flabbergasted at what people bring in sometimes. I'm thinking I'm going to get 12 plays from 19-year-olds about being in love and breaking up. Yeah. And instead they come back with these very mature ideas and very mature themes and wonder, that constantly surprising. And the same with the revision. Sometimes I feel like I've failed them because I've said this doesn't work, but I really don't know what to do with it at this point. They come back with a fix.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's such an authentic problem solving exercise.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you saw, there's been an article floating around, I think I saw it in the Chronicle last week, that it was about Sarah Lawrence College developing an alternative set of measurements that they're going to hold their students accountable to. In other words, instead of saying, we're going to gauge your success by your incomes after you graduate or your employability or whatever.
Right.
We have these, I think it's 6 things that we're going to measure your improvement on, that we're going to consider you, productive college graduates if you've done these things. When we're taking our own, because they said we're unique, we're not like every other institution in the country, we're doing our own thing.
Okay.
One of them was ability to accept and respond to criticism.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they just felt that a college-educated person out in the world for the rest of their life needed that skill in particular. This is going to be something they're holding themselves accountable for.
That sounds terrific.
That's pretty interesting, I thought.
Yeah.
The other things were a little bit more predictable. It was like, if being able to effectively communicate, there were sort of, I don't know, things that might be a little bit more predictable on the learning outcomes.
Right.
Language. But I thought that one struck me, and so how interesting.
I like that.
Yeah.
And that's, makes you think about your own ability to do that. And and it's a real skill. It really is.
It is.
I mean, it's a real temptation to be thin-skinned at times. So.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so other things about cool experiences that you've had, and since you've been at CSU, as chair, you don't get to teach as much, I guess.
Right.
But what are some of your favorite things to teach?
Well, a variety, and I often tell people that I feel like, the all-purpose, the utility infielder or something. I'm typically filling gaps, and especially those early level courses, because all the students have to take pretty much the same thing for the first year. So things like script analysis is a class that everybody takes. The Acting 1 class everybody takes. Eventually everybody takes history, although we have 4 different sections and they don't have to take all 4. But some take 3 and some take 2, so we have to offer a number of those. So those are the classes that I primarily teach, that I'll fill in when we need another section of it. So I love them all, because I do like meeting the students in their first semester, first year. It's great, it's great to get to know who they are. So a little later I recognize them. Sometimes if you're only teaching upper division, you see them around for a long time, but you really don't know their name until you have them in class. So the script analysis is always challenging. It's a lot of reading for them. I think it's a place where they first begin to think perhaps in different areas than they have been, because we ask them to read the play from different perspectives. Most of our students are actors, but some of them are theater education students. Some of them are designers, technicians. So they begin to see it from other people's perspective. If you were going to design this show, if you were going to do costumes for this show, what are some of the considerations you would have to take in? So, a lot of us feel like generalists in theater, because even though we might have I don't get to teach early 18th century British comedies that often.
Probably not.
Every once in a while it rolls around.
Yeah.
but so most of the time I'm teaching a little bit of everything, and there are things I know better and things I don't know as well. So I'm being challenged on that. So are they. So I enjoy the Acting 1 class is I think an eye-opener to them, because I'm going to make a hugely broad statement that's not true in every case, of course. But most of the time, high school students are being taught to break out of their shell. They're being asked to be expressive. So they are very much acting in a presentational way. They're acting for the audience. They're acting large. They're acting broadly. Not everywhere, but there's a legitimate need for that. I mean, when you're kind of a nervous teenager, to get up on stage is a hard thing, and to project yourself out there, you need to learn how to be able to do that. So there's room for that. But by the time you get to college, we start saying, all right, stop acting. Now we're going to start looking for truthful moments in this, and we just talk about stop acting. And so the Acting 1 course is the first time for some of them where they're actually being called on to just be themselves and authentic in front of people, as opposed to throw it out there.
Yeah.
And some people find that it's already hard to do. It's like learning bad technique in piano or something, that we're asking you to start over, redo it.
Yeah.
So it's challenging.
That is really interesting. I think for almost every field, there's some sort of big leap between the way that the subject was taught prior to college and what kind of complete shift in attitude or orientation that the discipline is asking you to take toward it, that takes students that first year to really wrap their heads around.
It's exciting to be a part of that, because I remember that for myself, some of those light bulb moments and aha moments, and just thinking, oh, I always thought it was this way, and maybe it's not.
Yeah. Well, that also reminds me of an interesting remark I heard on, it was on NPR, and I can't remember the context of the show, but it was a sort of a very short interview in which an actor or a director was asked to share their favorite, the film that they could watch 10,000 times or something.
Right.
You know what
was it like a guilty pleasure or something? Or it wasn't that one?
I don't know that it was a guilty pleasure.
Okay, maybe that was books, actually.
It might have been, but I think the idea was, describe. It could be a film that you might otherwise be embarrassed to say, I love this film.
But something you watch over and over.
What is it about that film speaks to you about, and so so the program that I was listening to was interviewing John I'm going to blank on his last name.
Not Leguizamo.
No, he was an actor in Swingers, and now he directs more often. I'll think of his name later. Anyway, I can't remember even what the film was that he said he loved so much, but here's what he said about it. He realized through this film that the whole thing, the idea that you're shooting for is that the whole piece doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to have some moments of truthfulness there. And this film that he loved, he was the first to admit, is full of not great moments, things that don't work or fall flat.
Yeah.
And yet, because it had these particular things that just exploded with, how resonant they were and how truthful they felt, he just loved it.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Oh, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to believe that no production is perfect either.
Yeah.
And especially, when we're training students, I think they come a long way from where they were, and I think most people, if they, my plug for CSU Theater, I think most people, if they hadn't been, would be surprised at the level of professionalism on the part of the students and designers. But even in a professional production, I've seen a couple recently that they don't all hold together perfectly, but if you get that moment, it makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah. Well, I just, it struck me as such an interesting way to view any kind of, piece that's meant to be assessed as a whole.
Right.
And yet, maybe that's not a fair way to look at it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be perfect as a whole, but does it have some moments?
Yeah.
Well, so what exciting things are on the horizon for you guys? You said you've got a busy summer.
We do. We're I don't know if most people might not realize that we're the only state theater program that offers the specifically theater education degree. And so that's been sort of a real mainstay for us, foundational. We have this program. We have students that are coming through that want to be theater educators. So we've just begun. We're actually in our third summer now of the master's degree in theater education. So that's primarily designed for teachers who are out in the field who really can't come to school. They might do some online courses, and that could be a part of this degree, education especially. But we offer the courses in the summertime so that when they're done with their teaching, and of course they want a little time off, so we condense it. We bring them in for about 6 weeks. Most of them live here. I mean, live on campus when they come.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll spend about 6 weeks taking their graduate courses, 2 or 3 courses during the summer. And it's pretty intense because it's pretty much all day long.
Right.
So that's coming up again. This will be, we're getting to the point where some of them are going to start completing that degree, which is exciting. And then this will also be the 4th summer of, we call it Columbus Repertory Theater. This is our summer theater offering. And we're trying to tie that into downtown tourism. We're trying to base it on a commercial model, you know, a little bit different than what I was talking about before.
Yeah.
We really do have to look at the box office. We have to do things that are appealing. The students are here all day rehearsing, building, just like a job, just like they would do in any repertory company. And then this year we're actually going to put on 3 plays. So we're bringing back 2 shows that have been really successful for us in the past. The one is Dora the Explorer for kids, and it was one of the most successful things we've ever done. So we're bringing that back because there's another group of kids that are in love with Dora, and it's just great fun to do it too. It's a fun show. And then we're doing 2 musicals. One of them is called the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, which is hilarious. We did it several years ago. It's audience participation, fun, you know, very, very much younger audience friendly, but really aimed at adults and that sort of thing. But then we're also going to try something new. We're billing it, I think, as bring your own dinner theater. So we're going to have tables in our black box theater, and people can stop and bring a meal. We'll sell, we'll have beer and wine sales, and we'll have soft drink sales, water. We ask that they not bring a beverage, that they purchase that there. But they can stop and pick up a meal at some other, you know, local place, bring it in, have that during the show. You know,
that's brilliant.
Yeah, we think it'll be a lot of fun. So we're doing, the show is called Suds, which is a musical review, fun story about early 60s music. So you're going to have a lot of the sort of bebop and songs that everybody knows. You know, My Boyfriend's Back and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, how smart.
I think it'll be fun.
Sounds like it's going to be a great success, especially I've been thinking over the last few weeks on weekends downtown as the whitewater tourism season starts. I really think this summer is going to be big.
Yeah, we're hoping to be a part of that. We really do. I think it's great for our students because they can go off and have that experience somewhere else. We'd like to be able to do it here. We'd like to grow to the point where maybe we have some, you know, pretty recognizable guest artists and things like that. But you know, we're trying to make this float, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of work.
Yeah.
Then our regular season is the usual mix, things known and unknown. So there's a couple of plays in the studio that people will not be familiar with. And then there are some things that everybody will know. We're going to do the musical The Wedding Singer. We're going to do the Laramie Project, which is, you know, heartfelt, wonderful play about tragic circumstances, but really a play that's really found a mark for itself around the country. And we haven't done it, so it's time we do it. And we'll be doing a couple plays, and we're actually going to produce a Shakespeare, Much Ado About Nothing. We're going to produce that in a studio space, which for folks that may not be familiar, the studio is a wonderful place to see a performance because you're right up close to all the action. In fact, you're usually right around it. We usually put it in a theater in the round, but we can do it other ways too.
Right.
It's a flexible space.
Yeah.
And then we're doing a play that I would guess that most people have never heard of. It's called Mr. Burns. And it's a little bit of the question that what would happen if we were in a post-apocalyptic, and I think the way it gets labeled here is post-electric world, in which sort of devotion to the Simpsons had become a religion for some people. And it's very experimental. It's very unusual, and I think, you know, it'll really ring a bell with a lot of people. It'd be really curious to see it.
Well, what a cool series. That sounds like it's going to be, you know, a really lovely, diverse mix
Yeah,
stuff.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. We're looking forward to it.
Wow. Well, this is exciting, and I need to figure out ways to get my students involved with the Much Ado.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, David Turner will be directing that.
Okay. Well, that's great.
Make sure that you two are in contact.
Good. Well, I really appreciate your taking the time.
It's been a lot of fun.
Chat.
Well, thank you.
I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Which I've asked everybody, and it's just sort of a fun whatever comes to your mind. But what would you say is the best kept secret about Columbus or about CSU?
Well, the theater department. I'll leave that. We often do describe ourselves as the best kept secret in Columbus, and then we follow that with we'd like not to be a secret.
Yeah.
A lot of people are not very familiar with where we are because we're down 10th Street right on the river.
Mm-hmm.
So you really have to, we would like to say we look great from Alabama, because when you're coming across the Dillingham Bridge, that is, you see our building from the front.
Yeah.
But we're on Woodruff Park, and they're doing some things with the fountain.
Oh, yeah, that's going to be great.
And there are some other displays that are going to be down there in the Whitewater Express. So I think people will be more familiar with our location before too long. But that's that secret. But as far as other best kept secrets in Columbus, I'm not sure if they're a secret. I just love the bike paths. I love riding on the rails to trails. I love riding on the Riverwalk. So I think the fact that Columbus is so user-friendly to outdoor activities is great fun.
Yeah, it really is. I think that now we're going to have the Riverwalk connected north and south. They're just about to finish that. It's going under the pedestrian bridge.
Great.
It's going to be terrific.
I didn't realize that. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And and the fact that you guys are going to be providing kind of after hours entertainment, I think, is just what the town needs.
Come see a show.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, looking forward to it.
Thanks, Susan.
Okay. Thank you, Larry.
All right.